The night was quiet on the edge of a small town. The sky was clear, stars shining brighter than usual. Mark, a man who often stayed up late, was walking home after work. He had no idea that this night would change his life forever. As he crossed the empty road near the forest, a strange light appeared above the trees. At first, he thought it was an airplane, but the way it moved was too fast, too sharp. Then came the sound, a low growl that was not from the sky, but from the ground. Something was coming. Mark froze. The forest shook. Trees bent as if pushed aside by an invisible force. Then he saw it. An alien war predator stepped out of the shadows. Its body was huge, covered in dark armor-like skin. Its eyes glowed with a red fire that seemed to burn in the dark. This was not an animal from Earth. This was something far older, far more dangerous. A predator feared across the galaxy, though Mark did not know that yet. His first thought was simple. He was going to die. The beast moved closer, each step heavy like thunder. Mark's legs wanted to run, but his body refused to move. He felt trapped in its gaze, as if the creature was studying him. He expected claws, teeth, or death. But instead, something strange happened. The predator stopped only a few feet away. With a deep growl, it lowered its head. Mark's heart pounded. The ground shook again, and from behind the creature, two small shapes crawled forward. Cubs. Alien cubs. They were smaller, their eyes glowing the same red light, but softer. They stumbled clumsily, like young animals not used to walking. Mark stared in disbelief. The war predator, feared and deadly, was not here to kill. It had brought its children. The beast pushed the cubs forward with its snout, forcing them closer to the human. Mark stepped back, shaking his head. No, this can't be real. But it was real. The cubs reached his feet and sniffed the air. They made a sound like a soft hiss mixed with a purr. The larger predator let out a low roar, not of anger, but of command. It wanted Mark to take them. Mark's thoughts raced. Why him? Why Earth? Why would such a monster trust a human with its young? His hands trembled as he looked at the cubs. They looked dangerous, sharp teeth already growing, but they also looked helpless. Without thinking, he bent down slowly. One of the cubs climbed into his arms. Its skin was rough, its body warm. The other pressed against his leg as if wanting comfort. Mark's fear did not fade, but something else grew in its place, responsibility. He could not explain it, but he felt the weight of the choice. The predator's eyes burned into him. It growled again, then stepped back as if testing him. Mark looked up. The beast was not leaving yet. It was watching, waiting. The cub in his arms made a small sound, almost like a cry. Mark's heart softened. All right, I'll keep you safe, he whispered, though he knew the alien could not understand him. Or maybe it could. The predator's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it seemed almost human in its expression. Then it turned slowly, vanishing back into the forest. The trees swallowed its massive shape until only silence remained. Mark stood frozen, holding an alien cub in his arms, another pressed close to his leg. His life had just changed in a way he could never imagine. But he was not alone. In the shadows of the forest, the predator had not truly gone. It stayed hidden, watching. Its test had begun. The cubs were now in human hands, and the galaxy would never be the same. Mark barely slept that night. He sat in his small cabin with the two alien cubs curled beside him. They were restless at first, clawing at the furniture, growling at the shadows, but soon they settled down as if sensing safety in his presence. Mark kept staring at them, still unable to believe what had happened. An alien war predator had chosen him. Him, an ordinary man, living a quiet life at the edge of town. He tried to convince himself it was a dream, but the sharp scratches on his wooden floor and the strange breathing sounds of the cubs reminded him it was all real. The real question was not what had happened, but what he should do next. These cubs were not puppies or kittens. They were alien predators, dangerous even in their youth. Already their small teeth looked sharp enough to tear flesh. What would happen when they grew larger? Could he feed them, protect them, control them? Or would they turn on him? Mark's mind raced. He thought about calling the authorities, but then he imagined soldiers storming into his home, guns raised, dragging the cubs away for experiments. He could not allow that. The cubs had been given to him, and in a strange way, he felt he had no right to betray that trust. But why him? Why not some scientist? Or someone stronger, smarter, more important? The predator must have seen something in him. Mark shook his head, frustrated. He had no answers. All he knew was that the cubs were his responsibility now. Days passed. The cubs grew attached to him quickly. They followed him wherever he went, stumbling on their small legs, making strange noises that sounded like a mix of growls and purrs. Mark learned they liked raw meat, and he had to sneak into the butcher's shop late at night, paying extra to keep questions away. He was careful not to let anyone see them. If his neighbors discovered the truth, it would spread like fire. Soon enough, the whole world would know, and then Earth would never be the same. Still, it was not easy. Sometimes at night, the cubs became restless. Their eyes glowed red in the dark, and their growls shook the walls. Once, when Mark tried to stop them from fighting, one cub bit his arm. The pain was sharp, blood dripping fast. Yet the cub froze immediately, as if realizing it had hurt him. It lowered its head and pressed against his wound with a soft cry, a sound almost like regret. Mark could not understand how such a beast could show guilt, but he felt it. Slowly, he began to trust them, and they began to trust him. What Mark did not know was that eyes were watching. Across the stars, other aliens had learned of this strange event. A human had been given the cubs of a war predator, a creature feared across many worlds. Whispers spread in hidden chambers and council halls. Some laughed, claiming the cubs would kill the human in days. Others grew worried. If the cubs survived under human care, if they grew to trust a human, then something dangerous could be born, a bond no one expected. On the fourth night, Mark heard noises outside his cabin. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but the cubs became alert. Their glowing eyes fixed on the door, their small bodies tensing like coiled springs. Mark felt a chill crawl down his spine. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened the door. The forest was silent, too silent. Then he saw it. A figure moved in the distance, its shape too thin, too sharp to be human. Mark's breath caught. Another alien. Someone, or something, was watching him. The cubs growled low, their small bodies pressing against his legs as if ready to fight. Mark knew then that he was not just protecting them from hunger or fear. He was protecting them from hunters. These cubs were valuable, perhaps priceless. Predators like their parent were rare, and their offspring were treasures to the wrong kind of people. He shut the door quickly, heart pounding. He realized his choice was no longer simple. He could give the cubs up, try to save his own life, or he could protect them and face whatever dangers came. He looked down at the cubs, who stared back at him with glowing eyes. They trusted him. In that moment, his decision was clear. He would protect them, no matter the cost. Far away in the darkness of the forest, the great predator still watched. It had not abandoned him. It had not abandoned its young, but it did not interfere. This was the human's test. The choice had been made, and soon the galaxy itself would feel the weight of it. The days passed slowly, and Mark tried to live quietly, hiding the alien cubs from everyone, but nothing about his life was quiet anymore. The cubs grew stronger each day, their claws sharper, their movements faster, their growls deeper. At first they stumbled like newborn animals, but now they moved with surprising skill, leaping onto tables, climbing walls, even hunting small creatures in the woods behind his cabin. Mark worried constantly, afraid someone might hear them or see their glowing eyes at night. But he also felt a strange pride as he watched them grow. They were not ordinary beasts. They were intelligent, learning from him in ways that frightened him. When he spoke, they listened. When he showed them how to open a door or fetch something, they copied him with startling speed. Mark tried to ignore the thought that they were becoming more dangerous with each passing day. What he did not know was that he was already being watched, not only by the great predator hiding in the forest, but by others far worse. Word of the cubs had spread. Whispers traveled through alien networks, mercenary channels, and black markets. War predator cubs were worth fortunes, and rumors said a human had them in his care. Some laughed at the idea, others wanted proof, and some wanted to hunt. On the seventh night since the cubs arrived, Mark woke suddenly to a sound that was not from inside his cabin. It was a crunch of footsteps on leaves, heavy and deliberate. The cubs stirred instantly, their eyes snapping open, glowing red in the darkness. They growled low, a sound that shook the floorboards despite their small size. Mark grabbed the nearest thing he could use as a weapon, an old iron rod he kept by the fireplace. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to stand. Slowly he moved toward the door, every muscle in his body tense. The cubs followed him, growls rising, their fur bristling. Then the door burst open with a violent crash. Figures rushed inside, tall and thin, their skin gray and stretched tight across sharp bones. Their eyes were black and lifeless, their weapons glowing faintly in their hands. Mark froze in shock. These were not humans. These were alien hunters. The cubs reacted first, lunging forward with terrifying speed. Their small bodies slammed into one of the intruders, knocking him to the ground. The alien hissed, its weapon falling, but the cubs were already tearing at his armor with their claws. Mark swung his iron rod at the second attacker, striking his shoulder with all his strength. The alien staggered, but turned on him with inhuman speed, grabbing the rod and hurling it aside. Mark stumbled back, panic in his chest, certain that this was the end. But the cubs saved him again. They leapt together, their jaws snapping, biting into the alien's arm. A roar of pain filled the cabin, and the creature dropped to its knees. The fight was brutal, chaotic, and short. The cubs were small, but they fought with a savagery Mark had never seen. Their glowing eyes burned with fury, and their growls filled the room like thunder. Within minutes the attackers were down, blood seeping into the wooden floor. Mark stood frozen, gasping for air, his body shaking from the shock of it all. The cubs stood protectively in front of him, their teeth stained, their chests heaving with heavy breaths. For the first time, Mark understood why these creatures were feared across the galaxy. They were born killers, even as cubs, but something else struck him deeper. They had fought not for themselves, but for him. They had defended him as if he was part of their pack. Mark fell to his knees, staring at them in disbelief. You saved me, he whispered, his voice unsteady. The cubs tilted their heads, their glowing eyes watching him closely, and for a moment, there was a strange silence between them. It was not the silence of fear, but of understanding. Far beyond the cabin, in the shadows of the forest, the great predator watched. Its massive eyes narrowed as it saw what its cubs had done. This was no ordinary bond. This was something far more dangerous. Under human care, its cubs were not only surviving, they were changing. They were learning loyalty, courage, and something even the predator's own kind did not fully understand. Across the stars, in hidden places where the story had already spread, the whispers grew louder. Some feared what this meant. If a human could shape war predator cubs, then perhaps the future of the galaxy was about to shift. But others saw opportunity and sharpened their knives. The cubs were alive, the human was still breathing, and both were now targets. Mark, exhausted and bleeding, looked around his ruined cabin. His life was no longer his own. The attack had proved one thing. He was not safe, and neither were the cubs. Danger had found him once. It would find him again. And next time, it might not be so easy to survive. The cabin no longer felt like a home after the attack. The broken door, the claw marks, the bloodstains, all reminders that his life had changed forever. Mark patched what he could, but he knew the walls could not protect him anymore. The cubs followed him everywhere, their glowing eyes always watching, their movements sharper and faster with each day. They'd save his life, and now they seemed bound to him in ways he could not explain. Sometimes they curled beside him when he sat, pressing against him like loyal dogs, but at other times he saw flashes of their true nature. Fangs bared at shadows, growls that made his chest vibrate, eyes that burned too brightly in the night. They were predators, but they were also his protectors. Mark tried to teach them small things, simple commands, gestures, even words. To his shock, they learned. When he said stay, they froze. When he pointed, they moved. When he called their names he had given them, they responded. This frightened him as much as it amazed him. They were not just animals. They were learning, adapting, thinking. One evening, as he cooked what little meat he could find, he noticed one cub watching carefully. When he turned away, the cub clumsily tried to copy his motions, even dragging a pan across the floor as if mimicking him. Mark laughed nervously, but inside he wondered if he was teaching them more than he should. Every lesson gave them power, and that power could one day be too much for him to control. But despite the fear, something deeper grew between them. When Mark was tired, they brought him small gifts, broken sticks, pieces of meat, even stones they seemed to value. When he was hurt, they pressed against him, their eyes glowing softer, their growls low and comforting. Once, when nightmares woke him in the middle of the night, he found the cubs, already awake, standing guard by the door, as if they sensed his fear. They were no longer just his responsibility. They were his family. Far away, whispers grew louder across the galaxy. Hunters who had failed to take the cubs spoke in shame, but their words spread like fire. The human still lives, they said. The cubs are with him. They fight for him. The news reached ears that had no desire to hear it. In hidden councils of alien rulers, arguments erupted. Some demanded the cubs be taken, destroyed, before humanity twisted them into something worse. Others dismissed it as nonsense, believing no human could truly bond with such creatures. But the ones who understood, the ones who had fought predators before, they were silent, for they knew what it could mean. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the forest, the great predator still watched. Night after night it came, hidden among the trees, its glowing eyes fixed on the cabin. It had expected the human to fail, to abandon or be killed by the cubs, but instead it saw something it could not explain. The cubs were changing. Their growls no longer spoke only of hunger or blood. They stayed close to the human, defended him, obeyed him. The predator's kind did not understand loyalty. They understood dominance, power, survival. Yet here, before its eyes, its cubs displayed something entirely new. The predator's chest rumbled with unease. If this bond grew stronger, it could change everything about its kind. Mark, unaware of the depth of what was happening, only knew he had to keep them safe. He tried to move carefully, gathering supplies at night, avoiding people, living like a shadow in his own world. But he could not hide forever. Sometimes he caught strange signals on his radio, voices speaking in languages he did not know. Sometimes he found tracks in the dirt near his cabin, footsteps too large or too strange to belong to any animal from Earth. The hunters had not given up. They were watching, waiting. One night, while the cubs slept curled beside him, Mark whispered to himself, "What am I doing?" He looked at their glowing eyes, even in sleep, and felt a heavy truth. He was no longer just a man hiding two creatures. He was shaping them, and in return, they were shaping him. The bond was real, and it was growing deeper every day. For the first time since this began, Mark felt a strange certainty. He was not just protecting them. Together, they were becoming something greater, something stronger. But as the bond deepened, so did the danger, and far beyond Earth, in halls of power and war, powerful voices began to ask a new question. What would happen if humanity could tame the most feared predators in the galaxy? Mark had begun to believe he was alone with the cubs, hunted only by shadows and whispers, but one night the truth came crashing back like thunder. The cubs had grown larger, stronger, their muscles more defined, their growls deeper, their eyes brighter than before. They no longer looked like helpless younglings. They were becoming true predators. Mark could feel it in the way the ground shook when they ran, in the way they leapt through the forest with speed no human could match. Yet they still stayed close to him, guarding him as if he was part of their blood. That night, a storm rolled over the forest, rain pouring heavy on the cabin roof. The cubs were restless, pacing near the windows, their ears twitching, their growls sharp and uneasy. Mark felt it too. Something was wrong. He picked up his iron rod, the only weapon he still trusted, and stood by the door, waiting. Then the forest went silent. Even the sound of the rain seemed to fade. The cubs froze, their eyes glowing bright like fire in the dark. And then it came. The trees shook as something massive moved through them. Heavy footsteps, deliberate, each one cracking branches and shaking the earth. Mark's heart raced, but deep inside he already knew who it was. The door to the cabin rattled as the wind howled, and through the storm, a shape appeared, towering, armored, and terrifying. The alien war predator had returned. Mark gripped his rod tighter, though he knew it was useless. The cubs stood in front of him, their growls low and deep, their bodies trembling not with fear, but with readiness. The predator stepped closer, its eyes burning like molten fire, its massive form barely fitting through the doorway as it entered the cabin. The air grew heavy, the smell of blood and storm filling the room. Mark expected the beast to take back its cubs, maybe even kill him for daring to keep them alive. But what happened instead shook him to his core. The cubs did not run to their parent. They stood between the predator and Mark, their bodies lowered, their fangs bared, their glowing eyes locked in defiance. Mark gasped, unable to believe it. The cubs were protecting him from their own kind. The predator paused, its head tilting as if confused. A low rumble shook the walls, part growl, part question. The cubs answered with roars of their own, their small bodies trembling with fury. Mark felt torn apart inside. He had not wanted this. He had not wanted to come between them. But the truth was undeniable. The cubs had chosen him. The predator's eyes narrowed, staring directly at Mark. In those burning eyes he saw rage, confusion, and something else, doubt. It stepped forward, but the cubs snapped their jaws, striking the air, refusing to move aside. Mark raised his hands, his voice shaking as he spoke. I didn't take them from you. You left them with me. I protected them. They're alive because of me. His words were desperate, but he meant them. The predator let out a roar so loud it shook the cabin, rattling the windows and sending a wave of fear through Mark's chest. The cubs answered, their smaller roars joining together until the sound filled the stormy night. For a long moment, predator and cubs stared at each other, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then something unexpected happened. The predator lowered its head, just slightly, and let out a sound unlike the others. It was not rage. It was not command. It was something softer, something Mark could not describe. The cubs stopped growling. Their glowing eyes softened, but they did not move from his side. The predator watched this closely, and for the first time, it seemed unsure. The storm roared outside, thunder shaking the earth, but inside the cabin a strange silence grew. Mark stood trembling, realizing the truth. This was not just a test. The predator had not come to kill. It had come to see what its cubs had become. And what it saw was something it had never expected. The bond between human and predator cubs was real, stronger than blood. The predator growled one last time, then turned and stepped back into the storm, leaving the cabin behind. Mark's breath came fast, his heart pounding, his body shaking with fear and relief. The cubs pressed against him, their eyes glowing with fierce loyalty. He knelt and touched their heads, his voice barely a whisper. You chose me, even against your own parent. Outside, in the shadows of the forest, the predator lingered, its glowing eyes watching once more. It had seen enough to know this bond was dangerous, not only for itself, but for the galaxy. The human had changed its cubs, and in doing so had changed the balance of power. The predator's kind would not forgive this. And far beyond Earth, others had already begun to move, determined to end this before it went too far. Far beyond Earth, in the heart of the galaxy, the whispers of what was happening on a small blue planet could no longer be ignored. The Galactic Council, an ancient assembly of powerful species, gathered in a vast chamber that stretched wider than cities. Thousands of eyes, of every shape and color, turned toward the center where the debate had begun. For centuries they had ruled the galaxy with cold order, balancing war and peace, ensuring that no one species became too powerful. But now there was news that made even the oldest rulers uneasy. A human, a creature from a backwater world, had been given the cubs of a war predator, and not only had he survived, He had bonded with them. Across the chamber, voices rose in anger. "Impossible!" one alien shouted, its voice sharp like broken glass. No predator cub would ever defend a human. They would kill him first. Another slammed its many limbs against the floor. And yet it happened. The hunters who tried to take them are dead, killed by cubs who fought for a man. Murmurs spread like fire. Some laughed, thinking it a foolish story, but others grew pale with fear. War predators were the most feared creatures in the galaxy, killers born from a world of endless blood. If humanity could tame them, if humanity could make them loyal, then the balance of power would shatter. An elder with silver skin and eyes like cold stone rose from its seat. Its voice carried through the chamber with quiet authority. "If this is true, then we face a danger beyond measure. Not because of the cubs, but because of what they mean. If one human can bond with them, others can too. If predators fight for humanity, then humanity will rise. And when humanity rises, the galaxy will burn." The chamber fell silent. No one argued, for they knew the elder spoke truth. Already, humanity was strange to them, fragile in body but fierce in spirit, able to fight against odds that would break stronger species. They had survived wars, disasters, and even the silence of space itself. And now, with predators at their side, what limits would they have? Some council members demanded action. Destroy the cubs before they grow. Destroy the human who shelters them. Destroy the world that breeds them. Others hesitated. To strike humanity without cause would break the council's laws, but fear made those laws feel weak. As they argued, the great predator who had left its cubs on Earth appeared in the chamber, its massive form towering over even the tallest delegates. A hush fell as it spoke, its voice a low growl that shook the walls. The human was tested. He did not fail. "My cubs live because of him. They fight because of him. He has done what no one believed possible." Some gasped in shock, others hissed in anger, but none dared to laugh. If a predator admitted this, it was true. The predator continued, "You fear humanity. You fear what may come. But the truth is simple. The cubs chose him. They will not leave him. If you strike at him, you strike at me." The chamber erupted in chaos. Some shouted that the predator was betraying its own kind. Others cried that it was proof that humanity was dangerous enough to bend even predators to their will. The council leader, a massive creature of light and shadow, raised its voice to silence them. "This cannot be ignored. If humanity and predators unite, they will become a force that none of us can stop. We must act now." Plans began to form, whispers of fleets, weapons, invasions. Far away on Earth, Mark felt none of this directly, but the air seemed heavier each day. Strange signals crackled on his radio more often. The cubs grew restless, pacing as if they sensed the storm approaching. Mark stood outside his cabin, staring at the stars, feeling a dread he could not explain. He knew he was being hunted, but he did not yet know that entire worlds now spoke his name, that in halls of power far beyond his reach, decisions were being made that would decide the fate of Earth. In the forest, the great predator returned once more, watching him with eyes that no longer burned only with rage, but with something darker, fear. Humanity had been tested. Humanity had been chosen. And the galaxy was about to decide whether humanity would be destroyed before it could rise. The sky above Earth was no longer silent. Strange lights flickered among the stars, faint at first, then brighter, until even the people of nearby towns began to whisper of visitors. Mark knew the truth before anyone else. The Galactic Council had decided to act. They would not allow him or the cubs to live, not when the bond between them threatened the balance of the galaxy. He felt the weight of it pressing on his chest every night as he listened to strange voices through the static of his radio. The cubs sensed it too. They no longer played as they once did. They prowled around the cabin with restless energy, their eyes glowing brighter, their bodies growing stronger each day. They were not helpless creatures anymore. They were hunters, warriors in the making, and they would fight for him. The predator had returned many times since that stormy night, always watching from the shadows, never striking, as if torn between anger and pride. But now, with the Council's fleets moving into position, the predator revealed itself fully. One night, as the moon hung low, the ground shook with its steps, and it entered the clearing near Mark's cabin without hiding. The cubs ran to it, but instead of abandoning Mark, they circled back to his side, their growls rising as though declaring their choice once again. The predator stared at him, its burning eyes filled with something new, acceptance. In a deep growl it spoke, not in words Mark could understand, but in a sound that carried meaning all the same. The cubs were his now. They were bound not only by blood, but by something stronger. Mark nodded slowly, though fear tightened his throat. He had not asked for this, but he knew he could no longer turn away. Dawn came, and with it the sky burned. Ships descended from the heavens, vast and dark, their engines shaking the earth. The Galactic Council had sent its fleets to destroy what they feared. Townspeople fled in terror as the alien craft hung over the forests like storm clouds, weapons glowing with deadly light. Mark stood outside his cabin, the cubs at his side, the predator looming behind him. For a moment, he felt like the smallest being in the universe, powerless against the weight of worlds. But then the cubs roared, their voices shaking the trees, and the predator roared with them, a sound so deep and powerful it echoed across the valley. From the shadows of space, the Council's ships hesitated. The sight of predators standing with a human was something no one had ever imagined. Commanders gave orders, weapons charged, but before the attack could fall, something unexpected happened. The cubs began to glow. Not just their eyes, but their whole bodies, a crimson light pulsing like fire. Mark shielded his face as the energy surged from them, crackling like lightning into the sky. The predator stepped forward, its body glowing as well, and together with its young it unleashed a sound, a roar so powerful it ripped through the air and shook the heavens themselves. Council ships staggered in orbit, their systems faltering under the strange wave of energy. Mark fell to his knees, stunned, as he realized what was happening. The bond between him and the cubs had awakened something inside them, something their species had never shown before. Loyalty had changed them. Love had changed them. The predators were evolving. Across the galaxy, the Council felt it, the ripple of power spreading through the stars. Fear turned to silence, silence to shock. No weapon had been fired, yet fleets trembled, commanders froze, rulers sat in disbelief. For the first time in history, predators were not only killers but protectors, and they had chosen a human. The great predator turned to Mark, lowering its massive head until its burning eyes met his. In that moment, Mark understood. This was never about a test of survival. It was about change. The predators had always been bound by blood and violence, but humanity had given them something new. The cubs pressed against him, their glowing bodies warm, their eyes filled with fierce loyalty. Together they looked to the sky as the fleets slowly pulled back, unwilling to fire, unwilling to risk the unknown. The Council had come to destroy, but instead they left in silence, shaken by the truth they had witnessed. Humanity had not only survived the predators. Humanity had tamed them, bonded with them, transformed them. Mark stood in the clearing as the ships vanished into the stars, the storm fading into quiet dawn. He was still just one man, but he was no longer alone. The cubs had chosen him, and through them, the predator itself had accepted him. The galaxy would never be the same. The Council had warned, had threatened, had tried to crush what they feared, but in the end they had seen something greater than fear. They had seen the beginning of an alliance no one expected. Mark looked to the rising sun, the cubs pressing against him, the predator watching with pride, and whispered softly, "The ending they feared is only the beginning."